Look at the richest people in the West right now: Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. Their wealth is largely invisible. It's locked up in algorithms, intellectual property, and server farms in the cloud. Now, turn your eyes to the titans of Asia. Look at Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong, the Tsai family in the Philippines, or the mega-wealthy conglomerates of South Korea. Their wealth physically blocks out the sun, you can walk inside it, live in it, and shop in it. While Silicon Valley was busy writing code to capture human attention, Asian tycoons were pouring millions of tons of concrete to capture the physical world. But why? In an era of hyper-growth tech, why does the old money, and surprisingly, the new tech money of Asia, remain completely obsessed with bricks and mortar? Welcome to Asian Money Map. I'm Daniel. I'm just a guy fascinated by the flow of capital, and on this channel, we decode the actual blueprints behind wealth in the East. We aren't here to praise these billionaires or villainize them, we're just here to look at the facts and understand how real money moves globally. Let's map it out. To understand the Asian billionaires' obsession with real estate, we have to completely strip away how the West views property. In the US or Europe, real estate is largely seen as an asset class. You compare it to stocks, bonds, or crypto, you look at the yield, and you diversify. In Asia, real estate is not just a line item on a portfolio. It is a historical survival mechanism. Think about the last century of Asian history. It is a timeline fractured by rapid regime changes, devastating wars, currency collapses, and the redrawing of geopolitical borders. If you look at the wealth of families prior to World War I, those who held their net worth in paper fiat currencies or early regional stock markets often saw their wealth evaporate overnight. Bank accounts can be frozen, paper money can succumb to hyperinflation. But physical dirt? A concrete tower in the center of a bustling coastal metropolis? That tends to survive. There's an ancient Chinese sentiment that essentially translates to, "With earth, there is wealth." This isn't just a cultural proverb. It's a hardened financial reality. I want to be clear here. This isn't just about getting rich. It's about not going broke. Wealth in Asia is rarely built for a single lifetime. It is built for the dynasty. The overarching goal is to create an unbreakable financial fortress that will sustain great-grandchildren you will never even meet. You cannot confidently pass down a highly volatile portfolio of tech stocks across 4 generations without massive risk. But you can pass down a prime city block in Tokyo or a massive commercial plaza in Manila. Real estate is the ultimate anchor in a historically turbulent sea, but preserving wealth is merely playing defense. Let's look at how these conglomerates play offense, because they are not just acting as passive landlords. They are executing what we can call the ecosystem monopoly. This is where we have to look objectively at how these strategies impact the everyday economy. Take Hong Kong, which famously hosts one of the most expensive housing markets on Earth. Conglomerates there, like Li Ka-shing's C.K. Hutchison, didn't just build apartment towers and walk away. They engineered enclosed, inescapable economic loops. Here is the step-by-step fact of how this works. 1. The land grab, the tycoon's conglomerate buys a massive plot of land from the government. 2. The residential base. They build a sprawling, high-density apartment complex. 3. The commercial hub. Underneath or adjacent to that complex, they build a massive shopping mall and transit hub. Now, who manages that mall? Their in-house property management subsidiary, who owns the flagship supermarket and the pharmacy inside the mall. Their retail subsidiary, who provides the Wi-Fi, electricity, and cell service for the entire complex. Their telecom and utility subsidiaries. When a normal citizen lives in one of these complexes, capital is extracted from them the second they wake up. The tycoon gets a cut when they buy their groceries, when they pay their internet bill, and when they pay their mortgage. The real estate isn't just a building. It acts as the physical toll booth required to monopolize a consumer's entire life. It's a brilliant business strategy, but let's be objective. It creates severe bottlenecks for the middle class. When 1 or 2 families own the land and the infrastructure on top of it, they essentially function as a shadow government, levying a private tax on everyday life. Now you might be asking yourself, buying entire city blocks and building mega malls requires billions in upfront cash. How do these families scale this fast without selling off equity and diluting their control? This brings us to the hidden financial mechanism that fuels Asian real estate empires, the leverage loop. And it only works because of a unique geographic reality. Unlike the United States, which has vast, endless plains of buildable land, the economic hubs of Asia suffer from severe natural scarcity. Hong Kong is a mountainous island. Singapore is a tiny city-state entirely surrounded by water. Seoul is heavily constrained by its topography and the DMZ to the north. Metro Manila is heavily congested and bounded by lakes and bays. When you have booming populations packed into geographical choke points, land values generally have one long-term trajectory. Traditional Asian banks know this. Historically, banking culture in the East is highly conservative. They hate lending against abstract ideas. If you take a brilliant, world-changing software startup pitch to a traditional legacy bank in Singapore or Tokyo, they will likely hesitate. But if you bring them the title deed to a prime piece of commercial dirt, they will open the vault. This creates a cycle. A developer uses the cash flow from their existing monopoly to buy a new piece of land. Because the land is in a geographically constrained, high-demand area, the bank values it at a premium and offers a massive line of credit. The developer uses that cheap debt to build. Once the building is finished and occupied, the valuation skyrockets. They then refinance that newly appraised building, pull out the surplus cash tax-free, pay back the initial development costs, and use the rest to buy the next piece of land. They are effectively expanding their empires using the bank's money while retaining 100% ownership of the appreciating asset. The dirt is the ultimate collateral. But there's a layer to this that numbers and spreadsheets simply cannot explain. It comes down to deeply ingrained cultural concepts: face, mianzi, and connections, guanxi. In the high-stakes world of Asian business, your reputation, your perceived power, and your physical presence are heavily scrutinized. You can be a billionaire on paper from trading crypto or operating an invisible e-commerce drop-shipping empire. But in the eyes of the old money establishment, and more importantly, in the eyes of the government, you lack gravity. But if you own the tallest, most architecturally stunning skyscraper in the financial district, if your family's name is etched into the plaza where global summits are held, that is an undeniable physical declaration of dominance. Trophy real estate buys you a literal seat at the table. It proves to local governments that you are heavily invested in the physical modernization of the country. In many developing Asian nations, governments work intimately with major developers because these tycoons are the ones actually building the nation's infrastructure: the toll roads, the transit hubs, the power grids. By owning landmark real estate, you align your family's interests with the state's interests. You become too physically vital to fail. This unlocks access to massive government contracts, exclusive zoning permits, and insider knowledge that purely financial investors will simply never see. Over the last 20 years, however, this playbook has evolved. It's gone global, morphing into what we can call the offshore vault strategy. If you look at the most expensive real estate transactions in London, Vancouver, Sydney, or Los Angeles over the last decade, you will consistently find Asian wealth driving the top end of the market. Why? Because while real estate at home is for building power and cash flow, real estate abroad is the ultimate insurance policy. As wealthy as these tycoons are, they are acutely aware of regulatory shifts. A sudden change in tax law, a political crackdown, or geopolitical tensions can threaten domestic wealth instantly. They need to park hundreds of millions of dollars in jurisdictions with strict, unbreakable property rights. When a foreign billionaire buys a $50 million penthouse in London or a sprawling estate in Beverly Hills, they usually aren't buying it because they want to live there year-round. They are buying it because it is a massive, illiquid anchor. It is capital flight disguised as luxury investment. If the political winds shift violently at home, they have already moved a massive chunk of their net worth into a Western legal system where it cannot be easily seized without due process. It's a safety deposit box that just happens to have Italian marble floors and a view of Hyde Park. Again, staying neutral here, we have to acknowledge the ripple effect. This massive influx of overseas capital is exactly why cities like Vancouver and Sydney have experienced severe housing affordability crises for locals, prompting their governments to implement strict foreign buyer taxes. The survival strategy of the billionaire often becomes the economic burden of the local middle class. Now it's time for some critical analysis. Because if I just sit here and tell you that Asian real estate is a flawless, bulletproof money printing machine, I would be lying to you. The biggest misconception is that this strategy carries zero risk. To see the devastating flaw in this model, we just have to look at modern China and the collapse of Evergrande. For decades, Chinese developers used the exact infinite leverage loop we discussed earlier, but on steroids. They were borrowing money not just from banks, but from everyday citizens who were prepaying for apartments that hadn't even been built yet. They used that cash to buy more land, to build more apartments, to get more cash. It was a staggering high-speed juggling act. But what happens when the music stops? In 2020, the Chinese government, realizing the debt levels were threatening the entire national economy, introduced the Three Red Lines policy, strictly limiting how much debt these developers could take on. Overnight, the leverage loop was broken. Without access to new debt, giants like Evergrande couldn't finish the buildings they had already sold. The bulletproof asset class suddenly triggered a multi-hundred-billion-dollar default crisis, leaving millions of normal citizens with unfinished concrete shells instead of homes. My opinion on this? The traditional Asian real estate model is brilliant for wealth preservation only when the underlying demographics are growing and the debt is managed carefully. When developers mistake leverage for genius, and when governments step in to pop the bubble, that physical dirt can very quickly turn into a financial grave. Concrete is a great anchor, but if you tie too much debt to it, that anchor will just drag you straight to the bottom of the ocean. Despite these risks, the cultural pull of property remains undeniably strong. You might assume that the new generation of Asian tech billionaires, the founders of massive e-commerce platforms, gaming studios, and social media giants, would do things differently. They made their fortunes in the cloud. Surely they don't care about dirt? But look at the data. Look at what happens the exact moment a modern Asian tech founder cashes out. Look at Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, who bought a massive ultra-exclusive estate on Hong Kong's Peak for nearly $200 million. Look at the founders of tech giants like Sea Limited, which owns Shopee, or Grab. When their companies went public and their wealth exploded, where did they park their cash? They famously bought up ultra-luxurious good-class bungalows, GCBs, in Singapore, some of the most heavily restricted, scarce, and expensive land in the world. Look at Tencent, building massive, sprawling physical headquarters that look like self-contained cities. Even the pioneers of the digital age inevitably revert to the ancient rule of their ancestors. They take the fragile, invisible wealth created in the digital world, and they lock it down in the physical world. Because deep down, they know that empires of code can be disrupted by a new algorithm or a couple of kids in a garage. But nobody is ever going to disrupt the physical ground we stand on. The billionaires of Asia are playing a completely different game. They aren't looking at quarterly earnings. They are looking at century-long timelines. They use real estate to build consumer ecosystems, to leverage conservative banking systems, to buy political face, and to secure generational insurance policies. But as we saw with Evergrande, when unchecked greed meets heavy leverage, the entire system can crack. So here's what I want to know from you, and I'm really curious to read your logic on this. If you were handed $10 million today, but you were legally forbidden from touching it for 20 years, where would you feel safer parking it? Would you put it into a broad US tech index fund, trusting the digital future? Or would you buy a prime, debt-free commercial building in the center of Tokyo or Singapore? Drop your strategy in the comments below. I read all of them, and it's honestly fascinating to see how this community approaches risk. And if you're serious about studying the raw mechanics of wealth, and you want to keep mapping out the exact strategies that move global markets, hit subscribe right now. We are going to keep breaking down the blueprints your financial advisor isn't talking about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next map.